Hi, my name is Mary. I want to share one of my most important episodes of my life, once my late husband passed away, with a lot of episodes of lies, revenge, and betrayal from my stepchildren. Edward Lee was a man of contradictions, successful yet secretive, loving yet distant. He had built a fortune that spanned real estate, stocks, and investments, but his personal life was marred by turmoil. His marriage to his first wife, the mother of his 3 children, had been marked by infidelity and long stretches of emotional neglect. After his untimely death, Edward found solace in Mary, a younger woman who seemed to bring stability to his life. Edward's will be a carefully drafted document, but it wasn't one made in the warmth of family unity. The wealth, divided with precision, had been carefully constructed to prevent conflict, yet it only fanned the flames of resentment. The estate, worth approximately $10 million, was split in an unconventional way. 50% went to Mary, his wife of 10 years, and the remaining 50% was split equally among his 3 children, Angie, Angela, and Andy. The will had been drafted a year before Edward's death from complications related to COVID-19, a time when he and Mary were experiencing a renewed sense of closeness after a turbulent few years. However, to the children, it seemed more like a cold reminder of their mother's absence and their father's late-life attachment to a younger woman. They resented Mary's share of the estate and felt betrayed their father had left everything. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation, the approval they'd never received. Here in the family's estate was thick with tension. The family gathered in the library, Angie, Angela, Andy, and Mary, seated with the family lawyer, Mr. Foster. Edward's death was still fresh, and yet there they were, bound together by the dead weight of his inheritance. Mr. Foster, a stoic man in his late 50s, opened the will with a deliberate calmness that made everything feel colder. He started by reading a letter from Edward, acknowledging his love for each family member, followed by the legal instructions. Edward Lee's estate shall be divided as follows: 50% to his wife, Mary Lee, and 50% shall be divided equally among his children, Angie Lee, Angela Lee, and Andy Lee. The room fell silent. Angie's lips tightened, and Angela's hand clenched around her champagne glass, the only outward sign of her boiling anger. Andy looked away, his face pale, his stomach in knots. Mary, sitting at the centre, tried to maintain her composure, but beneath her poised exterior, a storm raged. She had worked for 10 years to build this family, and now her stepchildren's resentment would not only cost her their affection, but it would also cost her the wealth she had been promised. Angie was the first to speak, though her voice dripped with calculated control. "We've discussed this before," she said, her words icy. "Dad would have wanted it to be different. He wouldn't have wanted you to take such a large portion." Angela immediately joined in, her eyes narrowing. "And we've been here longer. Why should you get more than us? You were a second wife, for God's sake." Andy, unusually quiet, shifted in his seat. He had a different agenda, but he wasn't ready to show his cards yet. He knew what his siblings thought. He could sense the bitterness, the frustration simmering beneath their words. Mary, despite her calm, knew exactly what was happening. She could feel the undercurrent of jealousy, the resentment rising like a tidal wave. She knew Angie, the oldest, would feel the most entitled. Angela, the influencer, wanted nothing more than to brand herself as a victim of inheritance injustice. And Andy, the youngest, was just too naive to know how to handle the wealth. "I understand how you feel," Mary said, her voice soft but firm. "But Edward's decision was clear, and we all need to respect it." Behind the polite facade, Mary's thoughts were already beginning to race. She needed to protect herself, not just from her husband's children, but from the bitterness and greed that would soon rise. As the days went on, each sibling began plotting, maneuvering in the background, each believing they could outsmart the others. The tension between them grew palpable, their silent schemes more dangerous than any confrontation. Angie's first move was simple. She began to investigate Mary's finances, subtly suggesting that the estate might not be as secure as it seemed. She hired a lawyer known for aggressively challenging will distributions. "If we can cast doubt on the legitimacy of her share," she said to her lawyer, "we can get that portion reduced. I'll need evidence that she manipulated Edward when he was ill." Andy, however, had another plan. He wasn't interested in legal maneuvers. He needed the money immediately. He had debts piling up from his failed music career and had started making inquiries about liquidating Mary's jewellery collection. He knew it would take only a few pieces to put a dent in his financial crisis. Late one night, while Mary was at a charity gala, he snuck into her private office, where he knew the safe was kept. He took the jewellery and planned to sell it to a dealer in Los Angeles. But things went sideways when Mary returned early from the event. She walked in on Andy holding the jewellery, and their eyes locked. There was no anger in her gaze, just a quiet, calculated fury. "You think I didn't see you?" she asked, her voice calm. Meanwhile, Angela began working the family angle. She had always prided herself on being the family's voice on social media, but now her posts took a more sinister turn. "I'm so grateful to have had such a wonderful father who loved us despite everything," she wrote in a heartfelt post. But in private, she was preparing to manipulate the situation in her favour. "I love you so much, Mary. You've always been there for us," she said during one dinner, as she coaxed Mary into giving her more access to the estate's assets, all the while mocking her privately. When all three children learned about each other's plans, they were furious. Angie, furious that Andy had stolen from Mary, was shocked to discover that Angela was playing both sides, pretending to be Mary's ally while plotting to take over. Angie and Angela briefly clashed in private, each accusing the other of being incompetent and reckless. Angie's lawyer warned her that Andy's actions might give Mary the upper hand, but it was clear no one was backing down. Mary watched the charade unfold with aching clarity. She noticed the sudden interest in her health, the flattery, the visits, the fake laughs. One afternoon, she overheard Andy on the phone in the garden whispering, "She won't see it coming." She closed her eyes. Her love for Edward had kept her from seeing how rotten the roots had grown. Mary hired a private investigator. Within weeks, she had reports on each child. Angie's business was drowning in red ink, desperate for bailout. Angela was entangled in 3 lawsuits and 1 PR scandal involving a fake charity. Andy had taken a loan from a loan shark in Las Vegas. She didn't confront them. Confrontation would trigger action. Instead, Mary acted of her own. First, she worked with her lawyer to establish a private, irrevocable trust in the Cayman Islands, placing her entire 50% share, assets, cash, and stocks, under legal protection. The trustee was a retired judge with a fierce reputation. None of the children could touch it without her written consent. Second, she created a new will. It included a clause stating that any heir who attempted to dispute the existing will would forfeit their claim. A no-contest clause. Her attorney, meticulous and discreet, ensured everything was executed under secure storage, with digital backup and biometric access only. Third, she transferred her real estate holdings into shell companies. Even if they sued her personally, they wouldn't access what she didn't legally own anymore. Mary also began documenting everything. Voice memos, email backups, camera footage. She upgraded her home security system and stored a physical safe in her bedroom, hidden beneath a false wall. Then, one morning, she walked into her office and found the drawers ajar. The lock on her filing cabinet had been picked. The trust document, the original signed version, was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints. But the nanny camera disguised in a bookshelf caught a grainy figure. Andy, wearing gloves, rifling through the files. Mary didn't call the police. She made a copy of the footage and handed it to her lawyer. Then she waited. She would not strike first. But when she did, there would be no mercy. Mary knew the game was on, and she had no intention of losing. After Andy's theft, she made her next move quietly but decisively. She hired a private investigator to gather information on each child's dealings, financial, legal, and personal. Within weeks, she had a full dossier on each of them, revealing their dirty secrets. Meanwhile, Angie was doubling down on her legal efforts. She had her lawyer send a cease and desist letter to Mary, accusing her of improperly handling estate assets. But when Mary received the letter, she didn't panic. She knew Angie was just playing a game of intimidation. At a family meeting with lawyers present, things exploded. Angela's husband, Jason, who had been sitting quietly on the sidelines, suddenly spoke up. He had been watching everything unfold with cold detachment, and now he saw an opportunity. Jason had his own secrets, an affair he'd been hiding from Angela for months, but now the family's dysfunction had created an opening for him. "I think Mary is hiding something," Jason said, his voice oozing with feigned concern. "We should look deeper into this." He proposed his own strategy, one that would put more pressure on Mary by questioning her financial dealings. Mary, however, saw through his motives. Jason wasn't trying to protect the family. He was trying to secure a share for himself, using his wife as a pawn. As the siblings continued their legal maneuvering, Mary made her own plans to secure her future. She shifted her assets into a separate trust and began negotiating the sale of key estate properties to an overseas investor, bypassing her stepchildren entirely. The legal battle soon spiraled. Angie's lawyer attempted to convince the court that Mary had manipulated Edward, while Angela tried to use her public influence to sway the public opinion. Meanwhile, Andy, now aware of the mounting pressure from both sides, sought out Jason's help, unaware that Jason was just another player in the game. The layers of deception ran deeper than anyone had anticipated. Jason, Angela's husband, had always been the quiet one, standing in the background pretending to support his wife's manipulation of the estate. But his real intentions had never been as innocent as they seemed. While Angela was playing her part in trying to wrestle the estate from Mary, Jason was making his own moves. Unbeknownst to Angela, Jason had been carrying on an affair for several months. His mistress Lauren was younger and far more willing to indulge his desire for luxury, power, and money. Jason had concluded that if he could secure his own share of the inheritance, he would be set for life, free from the ties to his wife, and with a new partner who could provide him with the lifestyle he'd always wanted. Jason's plan was simple: exploit the chaos of the family conflict to his advantage. He quietly took meetings with lawyers of his own, crafting a strategy to demand his stake in the estate as Angela's husband. "She's my partner," Jason argued in private meetings. "If we're truly entitled to something from Edward's will, I should get a piece of that pie as well. It's only fair." At the same time, Jason continued to string along his affair with Lauren, telling her that this whole family mess was his ticket to wealth. He made promises of a future together, one where Lauren would be by his side, enjoying the fruits of his schemes. He flaunted his involvement in the legal battle, painting himself as a victim of Mary's unfair claim to the fortune. In Jason's eyes, the more chaos, the better. It was an opportunity for him to pull the strings behind the scenes, secure his fortune, and leave Angela in the dust. But Angela wasn't blind forever. Eventually, she noticed the cold distance growing between her and Jason. The late nights, the sudden interest in financial matters, the secrecy. She confronted him one evening when he returned from a dinner meeting, his eyes evasive, his behavior out of character. "Jason," Angela asked, her voice trembling with suspicion, "are you seeing someone else?" Jason tried to hide his guilt, but it was too late. Angela found out about the affair, and her heart shattered. At first, she wanted to confront him, but then the realization hit her. Jason's betrayal was just another betrayal in a long line of them. She realized how little she had truly meant to him, and how deep the greed ran in their family. But instead of abandoning him, she decided to use his affair to her advantage. "You want a piece of the pie, don't you?" she said coldly, with a wicked smile. "Well, I'll give you one. The legal battle reached its apex as each family member pulled their last card, but no one anticipated how quickly it would all unravel. With each move to undermine Mary, the siblings found themselves further from their goal and closer to losing everything. Mary, however, had outmaneuvered them all. Her living trust, carefully constructed with the help of her lawyer, had shielded her from the onslaught of attacks. The estate that once seemed so secure had now become an immovable fortress. The real estate she'd sold and the assets she'd transferred to her offshore accounts were no longer up for grabs. The siblings, blinded by jealousy and revenge, had failed to see that the game they were playing had already been lost. As the siblings fought amongst themselves, their legal bills ballooned. Angie, once so certain of her victory, saw her financial troubles mount. She had used her connections and her legal resources to create a false narrative about Mary. But it was all for nothing. Her investments had faltered, and she found herself financially strapped. Angela, who had once been the family's golden child, saw her social media empire begin to crumble. Lawsuits, sponsorship losses, and negative press about her manipulative behavior took a toll on her reputation. The influencer who had once had it all now faced a stark reality. The spotlight she had lived for had turned cold, and her credibility was destroyed. Andy, the youngest, had tried to stay out of the conflict, but found himself sinking further into debt. His carefree existence, once built on dreams of music stardom, was now in ruins. The money he had hoped to win from his father's estate was now out of reach, and he had nothing left but the remnants of his failed plans. Jason, the last piece in the puzzle, found himself alienated from both his wife and his mistress. His affair had blown up in his face, and his greedy attempt to claim a share of the estate backfired. The public scandal tarnished his professional reputation, and Lauren, the woman he had once promised a future to, left him when she realized just how deep his manipulation ran. In the end, he was left alone. No wealth, no support, and no future. The family, once united by blood, was now torn apart. They had all played the game of greed, and in the end, they lost everything. But Mary had triumphed. She emerged from the wreckage not only with her fortune intact, but with a deep sense of peace. The inheritance, once a symbol of division, had become her shield, her way of protecting herself from the wreckage caused by her late husband's children. And in the quiet moments after the final legal battles ended, she found a sense of closure. The family that had once rejected her had now revealed their true colours, and she was free from their manipulation. The final twist was in the realization. The children, each consumed by their own jealousy, betrayal, and greed, found themselves alone, destitute, and empty. They had sought revenge on each other, thinking that the money would solve their problems, but it had only deepened their wounds. As each sibling stood before the ashes of their plans, they finally understood the cost of their actions. In their desire for wealth and power, they had lost the love and respect they once had for each other. They had allowed their anger and resentment to destroy not just their family, but their own futures. For Mary, the lesson was clear. She had never needed the approval of her stepchildren to be happy. The wealth, while important, was not what had made her life worthwhile. It had been her ability to rise above the chaos, to remain true to herself, and to protect what truly mattered, her peace of mind. Years later, the house stood quiet. The portraits still lined the hallway. The smell of jasmine tea still lingered from Mary's evening routine. But everything else had changed. Angie never rebuilt her career. She lived anonymously, doing freelance consultancy under an alias. She never forgave herself for pushing too far. Angela remarried and found peace in small-town life, raising 2 children far from the limelight. She taught them what envy did to a family. Andy toured the country with a small band, playing for anyone who would listen. He apologized to Mary once, in person. It was the only apology she ever received. Mary remained strong. she started a foundation to support widows and caretakers, using Edward's legacy to uplift others rather than let it rot in courtrooms. When she died, her will read, "Kindness, when tested, reveals the true strength of one's soul. To my stepchildren, I hope you live not richer, but wiser." They stood together at her funeral, silent. Not as enemies, not as allies, but as the remnants of a family torn by greed and mended by loss. In the end, Mary left them nothing they expected and everything they needed.